Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rabbi Gerald Skolnick and the Vice President of the United States, Joseph Biden.
You are with friends, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the Rabbinical Assembly for the remarkable security that it is now providing for me as I assume the presidency. I plan on taking a detail back with me to New York. Safeguard me. My presidency of the Rabbinical Assembly is starting off on a particularly high note, as this morning I have the high honor and the great personal privilege of welcoming the Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Joe Biden, to our convention. Were Joe Biden not the Vice President of the United States, but still a senator from the state of Delaware, a position that he held with great distinction for 36 years, it would still be a signal...
36 years, I've referenced you, it's a long time. I'm getting old.
I'll try that again. Were he still a senator from the state of Delaware for a long time, it would still be a signal honor for our assembly to welcome him as chairman or ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee for 17 years, and then as chairman or ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Then Senator Biden was among the most influential and respected members of the Senate. His work on criminal justice issues, including the landmark 1994 crime bill and the Violence Against Women Act, as well as his pivotal role in shaping U.S. foreign policy, is well known and universally respected. He has been at the forefront of issues and legislation related to terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, post-Cold War Europe, the Middle East, and Southwest Asia, and that expertise continues to be brought to bear in the current administration, where he advises President Obama on a variety of foreign policy issues. But along with the aforementioned contributions to both domestic and foreign policy that have distinguished Vice President Biden's years of service to this country, what would, of course, always make him a most welcome and appropriate guest at the convention of the Rabbinical Assembly is that he has been an outspoken, sincere, and effective supporter of the State of Israel throughout his career. For that, Mr. Vice President, I am so proud, on behalf of the Rabbinical Assembly leadership and membership, to offer you our heartfelt gratitude and appreciation. Yours has consistently been a voice of reason, principle, and conscience. We in the Jewish community, who love Israel dearly and have serious concerns about her security, know and appreciate the value of true friends. They are few and far between. But this we know and are grateful for. Your friendship, Mr. Vice President, is the real deal. It always has been, and we believe that it always will be. And through you, may I also express on behalf of our Assembly our deep appreciation for the powerful and deep commitment of this administration to the security and well-being of the State of Israel. As I'm sure you would imagine, Mr. Vice President, an organization such as ours, with 1,600 members, all conversant with the issues of the day, and blessed with, how shall I say this politely, divergent opinions, is rarely, if ever, completely of one mind on almost any issue. We count within our ranks Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. You name the dichotomy, we have them. Some are more outspoken than others. We care deeply and often divergently about all the issues that confront America in the 21st century, not just Israel. Even our members who are not American citizens, we are indeed an international organization. They too care deeply about America. What unites us all is that we love this country and appreciate it, and that is what makes your appearance here today such a special event for us. Mr. Vice President, I have no expectation whatsoever that you will remember this, but I had the privilege, along with our Executive Vice President, Rabbi Schoenfeld, of being at a reception that you and Dr. Biden held at your residence in Washington last year on the eve of the Jewish high holidays. It was a hot, late summer day as we gathered by the pool at your home. And I remember how you spoke from your heart of the enduring bond between the United States and Israel. As I was flying back to New York that night and thinking to myself how very lucky I was to be living where I live when I live here, I thought what a great privilege it had been to be a guest at your home. I'm glad to have the chance to reciprocate. I am far from New York, but here with my colleagues, I'm very much home. We welcome you here, Mr. Vice President. Without further ado, colleagues and friends, the Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Joe Biden.
And by the way, this is home for me. This is home for me. Thank you. That means the world to me. No, it's real. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Please be seated. Rabbi, thank you for that warm introduction. As has been observed, I've been doing this job in high public office for a long time. As a matter of fact, I've held high public office longer than I was alive before I held high public office. And when I kidded with you and the reason they were laughing, Rabbi, when you said 36 years, I did what my mother would show. God bless me for that, you know. And I was, well, at any rate, I'm honored to be back with you. And look, folks, all those years, you get a chance to speak to a lot of audiences. And as diverse as the rabbi makes you out to be, and you are, it's really a wonderful thing in my profession when you get to speak to a group of people who you admire, who you, in fact, agree with on every basic strategic issue. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Israel today, but I want you to know I know that your good work, your concerns, extends far beyond Israel. I want you to know I'm aware of your leadership, which I'll reference in a moment, about matters of domestic concern, of civil rights and civil liberties, about recognizing the dignity of every American. And I really mean this sincerely when I say I'm proud. I'm proud to be standing before you. I think that, Rabbi, your introduction was a little too generous, but I'm delighted to accept it. I also want to acknowledge Rabbi Julie Schoenfeld. And when the rabbi said, you may not remember I was there, I immediately remembered Julie was there. It took me a minute to remember the rabbi was there. I have to admit it. As we say in my religion, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Julie, you've served the Rabbinical Assembly with distinction as Executive Vice President since 2008, and you've blazed an important trail as the first woman to serve as a top executive of an American Rabbinical Association. Folks, it's a great honor to be invited to speak before you today to such a distinguished group of women and men who, to paraphrase the late Rabbi Joseph Agus, men and women who are guided by the twin lights of conscience and intelligence. That is an important and critical component and an ingredient we so desperately need right now in both our domestic and our foreign policy. Before I begin, I'd like to start by asking you to join me in a moment of silence to honor the passing of Benjamin Netanyahu, a historian, an activist, a steadfast defender of the State of Israel, and of course the father of Bibi, a friend of mine for the last 40 years. I have a picture I signed for Bibi years ago when I was a senator. I said, Bibi, I don't agree with the damn thing you say, but I love you. But he and I have truly been close friends for a long, long time. And when I called to speak to him about his dad's passing, typical Bibi, he started recounting his encounters with my dad and talked about my dad. And so I'd like to ask you for a moment of silence on behalf of his father. I think there are few families that can match the service that the Netanyahu family has made to protect and defend their beloved Israel. Some of you in this room have stood with Israel side by side since back in 1948. None of you women are old enough, but a lot of you men are there. And although I was not raised in the Jewish tradition, at an early age I was educated about oppression and genocide that had been visited on the Jewish people for 5,000 years, the historic ties between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. I learned all this at my father's dinner table. My father was a gentleman. My father was a decent, honorable man. And our dinner table was the place where you sat down to have discussions and incidentally eat. And I remember my father, literally, my father, when I was a young kid in the 50s and still in grade school, talking to my mother and sort of raving about how could there be anybody in the Jewish community could oppose the establishment of the State of Israel. How could that be? My father educating me as much as he admired Roosevelt. Why did we not bomb? Why did we not bomb the railroad tracks? My father, the first time I ever heard the phrase, never again, was from my father. My Jewish friends in Delaware referred to my dad as a righteous Christian, and he was. And he taught me and taught our whole family, without vigilance, without the safe haven of the State of Israel, the horrors of history have the ability to repeat themselves. And ladies and gentlemen, it was no surprise to my friends when I entered the Senate as a 29-year-old kid, even though I was from a state that had less than 1% of the population that was Jewish, I got immediately deeply involved right away in the policy toward Israel. I had great mentors. I had guys like Abe Ribicoff and Jack Javits and Frank Church and people who, Hubert Humphrey, people who literally were my mentors. That's not, that is literal. That is not a metaphor. It's literal. They were my mentors because I was the young kid. I was like the only woman, or the only African American. I was the young kid. Youngest by 10 years, put on the Foreign Relations Committee, the youngest by probably 35 years. And they literally took me with them on trips, and they filled out my resume. They filled out my education. And folks, I have to acknowledge that my commitment was driven by an overwhelming sense that not only did the United States and all the West, as a matter of historical obligation, have a moral obligation to the State of Israel, the decision that Harry Truman made and America made, in my view, carried with it immense obligations. But beyond that, I believed from the outset that, as my tenure as United States Senator, what I told an audience in Tel Aviv about a year and a half ago, that American support for Israel's security is not just an act of friendship and a moral obligation. It's in the fundamental national interest of the United States of America. No one's ever doubted I mean what I say. The problem is I sometimes say all that I mean. But I have said repeatedly, and occasionally gotten heat from it, were there no Israel, we'd have to invent one. Were there no Israel on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, we would have to invent one, a democracy. A democracy for all its failings, all its shortcomings, just as ours. A democracy. A democracy. It is the flagship. It's the flagship of democracy in that part of the world. And in a world of changing threats, challenges we've never seen before, it has never been more important, and also, I believe, more difficult than it is today to meet our obligations. Ladies and gentlemen, I've watched Israel struggle for their very physical survival throughout the last 40 years of my professional life. I made my first visit to Israel in 1973, and one of the high points of my career was within the first year I was there. I had the great good fortune of sitting in front of Golda Meir at her desk with her executive assistant, a guy named Rabin, for almost 2 hours on the eve of the Yom Kippur War. I remember saying to the Prime Minister that I thought Israel was still threatened because I was the first one they allowed to go from Cairo to the Suez, which had just been opened. And as I was riding that distance, you see these great clouds of dust, and people said it was sandstorms. But there was no cloud of dust on the left. There were no sandstorms. And it turned out, in retrospect, to be the Egyptian army maneuvering, getting ready for war. I remember saying that to her, and she said what the former Minister of Interior said, "You are a young man, Senator." And I'd just gone through sitting with her as she flipped the maps up and down, and she went through everything about, some of you remember she had that map case behind her. And she was a chain smoker, and she'd turn and she'd flip the maps up and down, and she was telling me about going through the 6-day war and reading me letters from young men and women who were in battle that got home without being followed by them. Well, you know, Israel's faced grave security challenges, which I'll say more about in a minute, but quite frankly, I am more worried today about Israel than I have been any time in my career, because it's a different struggle. The same old struggle exists, and we have to be vigilant, which I'll speak to in a moment. But what's underway today, at least my memory and my knowledge of history, the first full-blown assault attempting to delegitimize the State of Israel. The most significant assault since the inception of the State of Israel to delegitimize Israel as a Jewish state. And to put it bluntly, There's been only one nation in the world that has unequivocally confronted this effort, which is conscious as well as subconscious. At every point in our administration, at every juncture, we have stood up on behalf of the legitimacy of the State of Israel. And that's one of the reasons I'm so proud. I'm so proud to serve with President Barack Obama. I mean it. As a consequence of the long and accurate members of the American Jewish community, my support for Israel has never been questioned. In the beginning of our campaign, I remember being down in South Florida and telling people I would never ever join an administration that where a president did not share my view on Israel, which begins in your gut, works through your heart, and then gets to your head. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the president has been a bulwark against those insidious efforts every step of the way. It began with a well-publicized speech in Cairo, which got a lot of heat because he was going to speak to the Muslim world and the Arab world from Cairo. But in that speech, he made it clear to the Arab world and all the world. He stated that although we want better relations with the Arab and Muslim worlds, Israel's legitimacy is not a matter of debate, and our support for Israel is not a matter of debate. As recently as this year, the only country to vote in the Human Rights Council this spring against the establishment of a fact-finding mission on settlements. 35 countries, the only one to vote no was the United States of America. How many times has the president instructed our ambassador to veto resolutions that were detrimental to Israel? We've opposed the unilateral efforts of Palestinians to circumvent negotiation by pushing statehood in multilateral organizations like UNESCO. That's why we stood up so strongly for Israel's right to defend itself in the Goldstone Report in 2009, when the Gaza war, when that Goldstone Report was issued. We came out straightforward and said it's unbalanced, one-sided, basically unacceptable. And the rest of the world, including some of our good friends, were prepared to embrace it. That's why when Israel was isolated in the aftermath of the flotilla incident, of which I spent hours and hours and hours on the phone because I was in Africa talking with Bibi and with Ehud about how we were going to deal with it jointly, we supported straightforwardly from the beginning Israel's right to defend its national security. That's why. That's why we refuse to attend events such as the 10th anniversary of the flawed 2001 World Conference Against Racism that shamefully equated Zionism with racism. It's often pointed out by my critics that I said years ago that I'm a Zionist. I said precisely, were I a Jew, I'd be a Zionist, and I want you all to realize you need not be a Jew to be a Zionist. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a difficult choice. That's why we're working literally around the clock and around the world to try to prevent steps from being taken to further isolate Israel in the United Nations or in UN agencies, because the president has said this is no shortcut for peace and it is not a negotiating venue. Israel's own leaders clearly understand the imperative of peace. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Barak, President Perez, they've all called for a two-state solution, a secure Israel that lives side by side with an independent Palestinian state, but with absolute security. We're under no illusions about how difficult this will be to achieve, and you need a partner to achieve it. You need two people. You need both sides. It's in all our interest, Israel's, the Palestinians, the Americans. We all have a profound interest in peace. So we remain deeply engaged with both sides, as President Obama said recently, while there are those who question whether this goal will ever be reached, we make no apologies for continuing to pursue that goal, to pursue a better future. And to state the obvious, these actions have not been taken without cost. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, what frustrates me is that some who have asserted, particularly some of my friends in the Jewish community, strong supporters of mine, have asserted that we're not fully committed to the preservation and security of the State of Israel. At every turn, our administration provided Israel with the support it needs. Let me give you a couple of examples. Despite the tough fiscal times, President Obama has requested $3.1 billion in military assistance for 2013, the most ever. Beyond the record levels of security assistance we've already provided Israel, our administration secured an additional $205 million to help produce a short-range rocket defense system called Iron Dome. Some of you who are Israelis will just talk to your friends who live in southern Israel. Relatives in southern Israel can tell you that it took down about 85% of all the rockets recently coming through. And all those folks who are in the homes and schools and synagogues, how many lives are saved? I don't know. But it worked. Ladies and gentlemen, just a few weeks ago, the Department of Defense announced its intention to provide additional assistance to this critical system. We also continue to work with the Israelis on what they call the Arrow weapon system, to intercept medium-range ballistic missiles, David's Sling for shorter-range ballistic missiles, U.S. technology, U.S. money, and U.S. cooperation. And we're collaborating on a powerful new radar system linked to the U.S. early warning satellite that could buy Israel valuable time in the event if a god-awful missile strike occurred. That's why I found the criticism of the other team talking about how this new missile defense system in Europe hurts Israel. They don't get it. It's the exact opposite. Exact opposite. It provides early warning. It's not just about material and technology. It's also about relationships. We've launched the most comprehensive, meaningful, strategic, operational consultations across all levels of government in the history of the relationship. I can't tell your rank, so I'm going to make you a general. Lieutenant Colonel. From where I come from, that makes you a colonel. Colonel. In 2011, as you probably are aware, there have been nearly 200 senior-level defense officials who visited Israel and senior-level Israeli officials who visited their counterparts in the United States, more than ever has occurred in the history of the relationship. Later this year, our nation's armed forces will conduct the largest ever joint military exercise with Israel. Austere Challenge is called. I'm proud of our record. I believe that no president since Harry Truman has done more for Israel's physical security than Barack Obama. But I'll forgive you if you think I'm just obviously prejudiced about the guy I work with. But you don't have to take my word for this. Bibi Netanyahu has rightly said that our security cooperation with Israel, as he refers to it, is unprecedented. And as importantly, these efforts have not gone unnoticed by our Israeli opponents. Which brings me to Iran. We know that Israel's leadership, justifiably in my view, views Iran as an existential threat to Israel. And make no mistake, an Iran with nuclear weapons would also pose a grave threat to U.S. security as well. That's why our policy is not one of containment. Let me say it again. The United States policy under President Barack Obama is not one of containment. Not one of containment. It is straightforward. We will prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon by whatever means we need. Period. Period. One of the great benefits of my long relationship with Israeli leaders is some have become my close personal friends, in and out of office. One who's in office now is Ehud Barak, the defense minister. When Ehud last came to see me, he brought his delegation of experts and military personnel, and I had my national security team. We looked at each other and we said, let them talk. You and I, let's go off privately. And he and I sat in my office for well over an hour. And he talked from the heart about his concerns about Iran. The full delegation and our experts, they sat out in the lobby and they had a good conversation. A meaningful one. But we knew we had to talk to one another, look each other in the eye, take a measure of the man, whether or not he was speaking for Bibi and whether or not I was speaking for Barack Obama. He reiterated his concern with Iran's quest for a nuclear weapon and re-emphasized that Iran posed an existential threat to Israel. And I made it clear to him, and I want to make it clear to all of you, unambiguously. I told him then, and he would repeat it, that were I an Israeli, were I a Jew, I would not contract out my security to anybody, even a loyal friend like the United States. I made it clear for the President and me, for our administration, that if Israel reached a conclusion based on the facts as they could best determine them, that Iran was on the verge of eliminating their ability to respond physically to set that program back 2 to 5 years, I understood. We were not telling him or Israel what they could or could not do. As again, I told him I would not contract out my nation's security. And clearly, no Jewish state should ever assume that history has changed so fundamentally that they would do that. But we also discussed that our experts on both sides, their national security people, ours, their intelligence community, their military community, we're on the exact same page. The exact same page. The same assessment that Iran does not have that capacity and that it is some distance away and that we need to be exceedingly vigilant in monitoring their program and sharing information. And we share everything, even those things that could be taken, if they decided to, out of context. As a matter of fact, the Israelis and some of the information we've shared have calmed us down about what it really means. The bottom line is, Ehud and I agreed that there remains space for diplomacy. The window has not closed in terms of the ability of the Israelis, if they choose on their own, to act militarily. But diplomacy backed by serious sanctions and pressure. To succeed, though, as the President has clearly stated, on that score, the window is closing in the near term. This cannot go on forever. When we took office, I want to remind everybody, because my deceased wife used to say the greatest gift God gave mankind was the ability to forget. And my mother would quickly add, were that not true, women would only have one child. But when we took office, let me remind you, there was virtually no international pressure on Iran. We were the problem. We were diplomatically isolated in the world, in the region, in Europe. The international pressure on Iran was stuck in neutral. As a matter of fact, Iran's influence in the previous 6 years was growing in the region. Not diminishing, growing in the region. The relationship with Syria was obvious. Use of a staging point for Hezbollah and Hamas was clear. The rest of the region was basically stiff-arming the United States and saying, you need to be engaged more in missile defense, you need to be engaged more in. And we are being criticized in European capitals for being unilateral. And Tehran had allies and were intimidating their neighbors. And America's leadership was in doubt. We were neither fully respected by our friends nor feared by our opponents. Today, it is starkly, starkly different. Iran has one and only one ally in the region, Syria, which is under siege, greatly diminished, weakened as a sure and certain sponsor and a jump-off point for Hamas and Hezbollah. And suffice to say, we continue to provide support for those in the region who feel threatened and now are willing to step up because they are certain about our intention, our commitment, allowing resources to be prepositioned, allowing us to help them in their defense budgets. There's an increasingly united concern in the region about Iran and a greater willingness to work together to deal with the threat that it poses. And I would argue that it's not just because of the legitimate threat, but because of the President's efforts, Iran is now isolated and the United States is not isolated. Now, by the way, does that mean this will all work? That we can go away and say, obviously, they're going to capitulate? No. None of us know that for certain. We are not naive. But because President Obama understood that by seeking in good faith to engage the Iranians in the first instance, we're going to be able to engage the rest of the world in joining us in imposing the clearest, most significant, most damaging sanctions in this century, and I would argue the latter half of the last. By going the extra diplomatic mile, presenting Iran with a clear choice, we demonstrated to the region and to the world that Iran is the problem, not the United States. That's why China, that's why Russia, that's why Europe, that's why the rest of the world has joined us in these sanctions. And the President deserves the credit. I hope by now no one doubts that the President is willing to use power. But the President's smart. Physical power teamed up with tough diplomacy has turned the tables in Iran and secured the strongest unilateral international sanction in history, with all the powers, as I said, including Russia and China, participating. Now Iran is more isolated in the international community, more united in the effort to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon than ever before. Tehran has deep difficulties with their economy, deep difficulty acquiring basic equipment needed for the technology to produce nuclear weapon and missile programs. And they are having difficulty just doing normal international transactions. They're increasingly cut off from the international financial system, unable to do the most basic business transactions. It has struggled to buy refined petroleum and goods that needs to modernize its oil sector and its gas sector. World-leading companies are deciding to stop doing business with Iran. Already close to $60 billion in Iranian energy-related projects have been put on hold or shut down. And as a result of this unprecedented pressure, Iran is back to the negotiating table. They're having trouble figuring out how to insure their ships. That's why they're back at the negotiating table, because it's biting. It's biting badly. And by the way, anyone who thinks Iran is a monolith is making a gigantic historic mistake. The dissension between Ahmadinejad and the supreme leader is palpable. They will not both be around 2 years from now. And my bet is Ahmadinejad is gone. Ladies and gentlemen, beyond that, the dissension internally is real. We so mistake this notion that there's this one political monolith. Look, neither the President or I are naive. That's why while these talks are being undertaken and the international community is working with us and it's on the same exact page, we're not releasing, we're not doing anything but tighten the screws. As of July, the most significant sanctions on oil will go into effect, with the European Union having voted for severe sanctions on the importation of Iranian oil. Just last month, the President signed a new executive order targeting companies that allow Iran and the only friend in the region, Syria, to use information technology to root out and eliminate voices of dissent. And by the way, unless Iran changes course, the pressure will keep increasing. By the way, this embargo is due to go into effect in July. Remember, I said it here, and it'll be well before the election so you can judge me. It will have a devastating impact on the Iranian economy and force them to think even harder. The purpose of this pressure is not punishment. Is to convince Iran that there's an overwhelming price to be paid for pursuing nuclear weapons capability, that the price is too high. And the time is now for Tehran to make good on its commitment to the international community. And as the President made clear, we take no option off the table as part of our determination to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I leave this stage, I'd be remiss, both as an American and as Vice President, if I didn't thank you for how much you've done for this country on issues that range well beyond Israel and foreign relations. Issues that are near and dear to my heart. One of the reasons why I ran for office in the first place. The contributions on these issues could fill an entire additional speech. But just let me mention a few that mean a lot to me personally, what you've done. You fought to expand health care coverage for the poor and the elderly, including standing by the Affordable Care Act of 2010. You've zealously defended our nation's cherished civil liberties, and from your early support of the Voting Rights Act, the civil rights legislation that I was a young kid in the Senate, to recognizing the dignity of all human beings. And as much as any enlightened organization in the United States, you've advocated for the most vulnerable among us, the elderly, the poor, those genuinely in need of help. And your outspoken opposition for dealing with the fiscal problems by placing the burden on the backs of the poor and the economically disadvantaged has been a clarion call. It's one of the things that's united you and a lot of my Catholic friends in attacking and taking issue with the Ryan budget, which, either way, is contrary to the social doctrine that you teach and the social doctrine my church teaches. So let me end where I began. Let me end where I began by thanking you for your friendship and your steadfast support of Israel. You and I know, this is always going to be a battle. You know that it requires people speaking up loudly in every single generation, as long as we are a country and as long as the State of Israel exists. Your certain knowledge that the preservation of Israel as an independent Jewish state is in the interest of every Jew in the world is something you must continue to remind as you do your children, your grandchildren, all who you touch. And let me end with a story that touched me greatly. I referenced the fact that when I was a young senator, I had the great honor of spending time alone with Rabin and Golda Meir. And after about to its existence on the shores of the Mediterranean, she all of a sudden changed her expression on her face, said, "Senator, would you like to have a photo opportunity?" And I thought, well, yes, I'd love that. Many of you have been in the Prime Minister's office, those double doors that open, and you walk out and there's like not a hallway, but it is a hallway, but it's more of an entranceway. And we walked outside, and I was standing next to her, and no comments to the press, just photo. And there were about a dozen press people with cameras and television cameras, and the flashes were flashing. And without turning her head to speak to me, she looked straight ahead and said something to me I thought I was the only one in the world she ever said it to. She looked straight ahead, she said, "Senator." Now I'm standing next to her here. She said, "Senator, don't look so worried. We Jews have a secret weapon in our fight for survival here in this region." And I thought she was about to film me in something really consequential. And I'm standing here, and I turn, and there's a picture of I turned, and we're like, "What?" And without her looking at me, still looking straight ahead, I'll never forget it. It was a memorable occasion. She said, "Our secret weapon is, we have no place else to go. Remember it." This is the only audience I probably don't have to say, "Remember it." But remember it. Ultimately, there's no place to go. Thank you for reminding the world. Thank you for reminding our country. And thank you for all you do for America. I love you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, all of us, leadership and members of the Rabbinical Assembly and our guests assembled this morning, thank you for your gracious and generous words. And there is a wonderful expression in our tradition, Dvarim hayotzim min halev, nichnasim el halev. Those words that are offered from the heart can penetrate a heart as well. And when you speak words of support and words of strengthening us and encouraging us, they enter our hearts. And your sincerity is heartfelt, and we feel it, and we're most grateful. I want to make a presentation to you this morning on behalf of our Assembly. I have heard President Obama on numerous occasions, and if my memory serves me correctly, I do believe you referenced this poolside at your home on that day that you don't remember that I was at, but that's okay. I'll get over it, Mr. Vice President.
You got to come back.
I'll come back. It's a deal. I've heard the President and you speak with the greatest of respect of our concept of tikkun olam. of the prophetic emphasis on repairing the world and social justice. That is a global vision that blesses and graces our tradition. But in the spirit of think globally, act locally, tzedakah, the giving of charity, is how we begin the process of repairing the world. You begin to repair the world by healing those around you. Your emphasis, the administration's emphasis, on caring for those least able, for ensuring the well-being of every member of American society, speaks to the idea of tzedakah and leads to tikkun olam. In that spirit, it's my pleasure to present you with this magnificent tzedakah box, inscribed with the following words: Baruch ha'osek b'tzorchei tzibur. Praised is the one who strives on behalf of the public good. Presented to Vice President Joseph R. Biden, Jr. by the Rabbinical Assembly, May 8, 2012, 16 ER 5772, Rabbi Gerald C. Skolnick, President, Rabbi Julie Schoenfeld, Executive Vice President. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I got to tell you a quick story about that. I've got to tell you a story. This magnificent tzedakah box, I've had the great privilege over the years of being presented the little blue boxes, as well as a couple lovely tzedakah boxes. And I want to tell you, a very good friend of mine from childhood who went in the priesthood, a Monsignor, was over our house. And I have them arrayed on my library shelf. And he looked, he knows me well. We grew up. He looked and he said, Joe, I don't see any, what we Catholics, when your church, when you go in church, you get a box of envelopes, which put in your weekly offering. He said, Joe, I see one, I forget how many, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tzedakah boxes. I don't see one box of envelopes. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you.